Hello, everyone. This is Justin Cobb with another exciting episode of Insights. I'm coming to you from Arlington, Virginia. And today's guest, I'm excited for you all to meet her. Her name is Elisa Glick. Elisa, thank you for coming on to the show today. I'm so grateful that you're taking this time to share with us.
Oh, well, it's my honor. I'm delighted to be in community with you and have this opportunity to explore and learn together.
Yes. And I want to give you this opportunity to go ahead and share some of the work.
Well, actually, I'm retired. So although I still very much am a women's and gender studies and queer studies professor, and I do hold the title of associate professor emeritus, but I decided to take early retirement in 2022 in order to broaden the impact of my work. And I launched my own consultancy, Elisa Glick Consulting, focusing on diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging work. While I do still work with colleges and universities, because inclusive teaching is an area of expertise of mine, and of course, I'm very much an educator at heart, but I do really enjoy the work that I'm doing now, which gives me an opportunity to kind of talk with and support other groups of folks. I've been working a lot with nonprofits, both where I'm located here in the Midwest. I'm in Missouri, as well as nationwide. And my areas of expertise are courageous conversations. I do work around anti-racism and anti-Semitism, and of course, queer studies and helping folks to connect across difference.
All those are so important, especially in today's age and given our current circumstances. So, Elisa, let's go ahead and dial back the clock, shall we? We're gonna we're gonna go back in time, and can you share more about what it was like for you growing up and what you were witnessing? I tell people all the time that what leads up to what we're doing now, it doesn't just start to when we're adults, and we often feel it when we are kids
Mhm.
as well. So,
Mhm.
where do you typically see a lot of the seeds for the work that you're doing now being planted in your life?
Well, so first, before I answer, I have to say that I love this question. I love your approach. I also love the way you just phrase that, and you can tell that I'm a former English professor. Also, that's my PhD's in English, so I love how you phrase that as well. Uh, you know, I would say that one of the major experiences for me has to do with my health and being somebody who was both a chronically ill child, as well as somebody who was diagnosed with scoliosis and wore a brace, and very much changed my experience as a young person. That happened going into the brace was when I was 7 years old. And it was very othering, as is the case, right, for many folks who have disabilities or chronic health conditions. And I do think that my experience of feeling marginalized, othered, treated differently, made I always remembered, gym class and sort of how people, uh, adults would just send me off to the library to write a report. I mean, nobody ever really thought about the idea that maybe there was a way to make me feel like I belonged. So I do think that that piece has has been really informative to kind of my interest in building belonging cultures, for example.
Mhm. A lot of what you're talking about is speaking to so many different intersections, disability, and then you talk about gender studies, queer studies. You're talking about anti-Semitism as well, with a lot of this work and
Mhm.
anti-racism. All of it is still pertinent in this day and time. What were some of the challenges that you were experiencing in the work, like when you first started your work?
Mhm.
Because these are all leading up to how you're doing this work now. Like, I'm curious about
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, and I don't really get a chance to talk about this often, so I appreciate the question. W so when I graduated, from, uh, from grad school with my PhD, and at the time, and that was in 2000, and I had decided to focus on queer studies, which was pretty pretty unusual at the time. I mean, all I only mention that I went to Brown University for my PhD because it's known as one of the most liberal, progressive kind of campuses in America. And all of my advisors told me that I was making a mistake, that it was too risky. So that gives you a sense of kind of what the culture was like. And um, I thought there was a very good chance I would never even get a job as a professor. I did in all places. I mean, I'm originally from the East Coast. Um, in all places, Missouri, which I had never been to the Midwest. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say I actually had to look it up on a map. I was one of those people, um, the flyover types. But when I arrived here, it was the Women's and Gender Studies department that was spearheaded kind of hiring somebody who worked at the intersection of queer studies. And I'll just say that the rest of the campus wasn't necessarily on that same page. I mean, so just to give you an example, on my interview day, uh, I will always remember that the dean, I asked him, because I was the first faculty member who's openly queer, whose primary area of research and teaching was queer studies. And like any young professor, I was concerned about getting tenure and my future. And so I asked him, how might that affect um, my future? And he said, "Well, we haven't hired any Martians either,"
Mm.
which was so incredibly othering and devastating. And I will tell you that if any of my other job offers had come through, I never would have taken this job, even though people told me, "Oh, you'll never see him again," and this and that. Um, but I mean, it was such a shocking thing in a job interview to have your dean essentially call you an alien. Talk about feeling othered and right, not and being made to feel like you don't belong, right? The funny part is that he and I are actually friends now, and he's I mean, he's long since left, that particular position and is at a different institution, but he really became a huge champion of me and my work, and grew a lot around these issues. So that's something that's also very um, sort of unique about kind of who I am. I'm really proud of the fact that I have quite a few relationships that didn't start on the best terms, but ultimately, I found ways to connect with folks who might seem like, you know, true uh, enemies, if you will. I mean, of course, I'm talking about like decades. This took a very, very long time.
Yeah, I'm curious, where did that ability come from? Because it's definitely something that you don't hear about all too often. I think the most recent example would be, oh, and I feel so bad, I forget her name, but she is collaborating with Will Ferrell. They traveled across the country and
Oh,
yeah,
Will and Harper
yeah,
is the
yeah.
Netflix film,
Yes,
right?
because that's essentially what that film was about, was Will Ferrell learning how to be more trans sensitive and
Mhm.
queer sensitive, and that, and it's a topic that is so important because we're all unlearning a
That's right.
lot of programming that we've received since we were young, but even before then, because this is something that was passed down from generation to generation, where
Mhm.
we all are on this path of, okay, do I choose to continue on this program or not? So
Right.
can you tell me like where this ability to foster this sense of learning came from? That's not something that everyone has.
So, I thank you for that question, and I would be glad to talk about that. I also was just thinking as you were talking about how this is uh, something that we really need as a nation
Mhm.
too. Since we're not that I'm trying to turn this into a conversation about the election, but since we are speaking really rather soon after the election, um, I think that, this is something for us to be thinking about. There's so many conversations about how polarized, right, uh, um, society is, and so, um, how we find ways to talk to folks who are different from us, is, in my opinion, one of the most important things, that all of us need to do. And you are right. We're all unlearning, and also many of us have a lot of trauma, right? Which affects us in our capacity to do this kind of work. And that's one of the reasons why I often talk about how important it is for those of us who are in this space to take responsibility for doing our own healing. Um, okay, so to your question, my answer is that I was disowned from my family when I came out. Very brutally, not that there's ever really a nice way to be disowned, but I was cut off emotionally and financially. This was when I was in college, and uh, received hate mail from my mother, death threats. I'd rather you be dead at my feet than be a lesbian. And my family was everything to me. So to say that I was devastated is to put it mildly. Um, and my story is too complex for me to kind of do justice to it in this framework. But what I will say is that um, when I think about my why for this work, it that's where I always go to, um, and uh, and the reason why is sort of similar to what I talked about in terms of my experience as a child in feeling othered. um, you know, just being excluded in my own family,
Mhm.
and made to feel like a monster. um, is something that, I still very much carry that pain with me, although I've, healed my relationship with my family, I'm very happy to say, and have done that work. So when you say, where does it come from? That it took many, many years to do that work, but I did. And, by the end of her life, my mother ended up being a big champion of LGBTQ plus rights. And, if you had told me years earlier that that would have ever happened, I would have said it was utterly impossible, because the amount of hatred and animosity that I received was just so great. So yeah, so that's really where it comes from, and my belief that people can grow and change. It might take a very long time,
Mhm.
but they can.
Absolutely. And that's the one thing I always insist on in this work is the fact that this work has to be done not only for the people who are experiencing the marginalization, it also needs to be done for with and for those who are driven to other in this regard. Because at the end of the day, this harm impacts all of us in this regard. One, I keep bringing up his name and in my podcast, but shout out to this wonderful man who helped me in my time that I needed it, Anthony Frazier,
Mm,
who did so much beautiful work in a small Pennsylvania rural community, helping not only children get out of gangs, but also get out of white nationalist groups.
oh, wow.
Yes, it's so like that work is so important. He didn't just do it with the children, he also did it with a lot of like people who are like in their early 20s, etc.
Mhm,
But essentially helping them get out of there. He has the robes of people that he helped to get out of those spaces and everything, and he safeguards them, and he sets them aside and he uses them as examples. It's
mm,
important work, but I think about how this work is so necessary because our humanity is at the core, and a lot of people are driven into this because of tough choices that had been made not only by them but by generations past.
mhm.
There, Elisa, I'm curious, as someone who has been doing this organizing work for, in your words, decades. There, I'm curious, what was the journey that led up to you even beginning this work? Because it's one thing to go through all these obstacles and hurdles, and then it's another thing to say, hey, you know what, I'm going to take this and I'm going to use it to propel myself into the kind of work I want to do. Like, what was that like for you?
I think I've always been somebody who has been politically kind of oriented, and sort of believing truly that, the personal is political. And and that, I mean, since I was a teenager, really. And so it felt very natural for me, um, as a way of, quite frankly, trying to have something kind of positive come out of my struggle, to 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 commit to trying to share my story, and also to to teach folks about communities that they might not be familiar with. So teaching was a kind of activism for me. Uh, but but it, I talked about how in grad school that I made the decision to kind of focus on queer studies, but I didn't start out in graduate school like that. I was, believe it or not, I was actually a Victorianist. So I was very interested in that. That was how I kind of went in, and but it became impossible for me to not bring all of who I am to my work. And I'm just somebody who is able to be most successful when I'm really passionate about the work that I'm doing. And social change, social justice, those are issues that are very that I'm very passionate about, and sort of define
Mm.
who I am. So
Absolutely. And it's a controversial now because of the rhetoric that is going on. We see all these sweeping generalizations about so many different groups of people,
Mhm.
and it really does get overwhelming sometimes. I'm curious, as someone who has been doing this work for this amount of time, like, what kept you going on those hard days? What kept you motivated?
Uh, well, you know, there were a lot of many hard days and many days when I think I wasn't able to kind of find that inner optimism. But my first answer is my spouse, um, Carolyn Sullivan. We this summer celebrated our 31st anniversary. So we have it's kind of amazing that we've been together for 3 decades. But she it has always been, can you tell I'm getting emotional? She's always been my biggest supporter, and just uh, there for me,
Yeah.
and help me through those moments.
And I want to pause for a moment, and audiences, I just need to reel us back in for a moment because did you hear Elisa? 3 decades. 3 decades of support and love and being there for you in your best moments and in your worst moments. That is not an easy feat to accomplish. There, kudos to you and kudos to the both of you. Like, wow, that's phenomenal.
Well, we're very blessed, but she talked me into even allowing myself to be nominated. So she even now believes in me more than I believe in myself. And in fact, she's the reason that I left the academy. Because she is a nonprofit consultant, has a very successful business, New Chapter Coaching, which I'm a strategic partner of. But as I became increasingly sort of felt that my social justice values were not shared in an authentic way by the institution that I was a part of, and really felt that I couldn't continue to do the work that I had increasingly become most passionate about. Uh, she kept saying to me, you could leave, you could become a consultant. There are folks who really would love to work with you. And it took me a long time to actually believe her about that, because I think I mean, may sound a little um, hard to believe for folks who are not in academia, but one of the ways that people are often sort of faculty are kept there is because we are taught over and over again that there is no world outside the academy, that, no, your skills are not transferable, et cetera. So I had been brainwashed, if you will, for quite a while. So it took me a while to believe her, but it was it hasn't been easy. I'm not going to pretend that it has been, especially in light of the kind of work that I do, and that we're in the midst of a backlash against diversity, equity, and inclusion. But it's been great, and I, have not looked back, and I'm so glad that I have made this change. Very proud of the work that I did, of course, as a faculty member. But that's an example of the enormous impact that she has had on my life personally and professionally.
Absolutely. And the work that you are doing, it really did have to start with you, in the sense of you had to see your own potential. I see this a lot in terms of my own personal life as well, where I think about the years I did not believe in myself and in my own capabilities, and how I was selling myself short. And yeah, other people saw that in me, could see my potential. This is why community is so important. We need
Mhm.
other people to see our potential, because they are cheering for us. And when we finally make the aha, when the little light bulb goes off and we realize, oh, wait, I actually can do this, it's a lot of it is because of the seeds that are planted by those around us who see our potential, who
Mhm.
value what we can contribute. There are props to all of our communities, to the people who stand in our corners. We celebrate you. We appreciate you. You all are so necessary.
It's so true. And I mean, that attitude drove a lot of my teaching and my advocacy for uh, um, LGBTQ plus IA students, feminist students, Black and Brown students, who often experienced real inequities and discrimination. And so, that that idea of being able to create, um, I wouldn't say sort of safe spaces, but, places where people can feel more supported than they might in a larger community, I think is really important.
One of the reasons why we are even having this discussion today, I feel like this is a good segue into the concept of the courageous conversation. And anyone knows there's plenty of those that could possibly had, and a lot of them are not being had in that regard. There, Elisa, one of the things with in regards to these courageous conversations, I know your work with regarding to not only LGBTQ, but also with addressing anti-Semitism and addressing anti-Palestinian hate, Palestinian rights. And a lot of people are out there. There are people out there who get the connections, and then there are other people who maybe don't quite grasp how those things are all connected to each other.
Mm.
I'm I'm curious to know more about your perspective in these regards. How can we courageously have a conversation about the interconnectedness of these issues,
Mhm.
especially in a time where it is so polarized to do so?
Yeah. Well, go ahead and ask me a really hard question, why don't you, Justin?
Yes.
Because yeah, that is very, very challenging, especially right now. But I think so vitally important, and you're absolutely right that it's a key part of who I am. I mean, there's a lot of talk often about intersectionality, but I find that, even folks who say that they champion intersectionality sometimes don't actually in practice, right? Because it's really hard. And frankly, we're often, I think, punished too. I mean, just to be utterly frank, which I, often try to be, but right, that uh, there's a lot of pressure for folks to quote unquote stay in their lane,
Mhm.
right? And so sometimes when we maybe uh, practice allyship, I'm not really a huge fan of that word lately, but which I'm happy to talk about if you want. But when we sort of practice allyship imperfectly, right, and then there's a lot of kind of criticism. So, I think um, I think that it's important for those of us who are committed to collective liberation to uh, have a mindset that welcomes others, into these conversations, um, and helps. I mean, people have to take responsibility for their own learning and for doing the work, of course, and in a genuine way rather than a performative way. But I also think that part of the challenge is, for example, shifting more from a calling out attitude to more of a calling in, so that, um, when folks do make mistakes, and we all will, right? That the message is not that if you mess up once that don't you can't contribute and you can't learn and grow and do better,
Mhm.
right? Because that is what we all need to do. So I do believe that, right, a threat to, um, oh shoot, I'm not going to be able to, the MLK, a threat to justice anywhere is, help me out with that quote, Justin.
A threat to justice anywhere is
Right.
a threat
A
to
threat to
justice
justice
everywhere.
everywhere. Yes.
Mhm.
And that is true. More of us need to remember that. It's, you mentioned, um, kind of, I think it's especially difficult when conversations have become very polarized. So you talked about, um, you know, like, how can I advocate for, um, against anti-Semitism as well as anti-Palestinian racism? But to me, those things are not in opposition, and
Mhm.
I think we need to challenge ourselves around these kinds of issues. Right? To what extent um, are we allowing some of the hatred in the um, kind of larger culture to seep into uh, social justice spaces when we're perhaps stereotyping and othering folks who are also experiencing violence and discrimination.
Mhm. Especially in a time where you see so much of the bedrock of the institutions, the same ones that have been in charge of maintaining the social fabrics of our society, they have been rooted in a lot of this conflict, in this division, in this
Oh,
divide.
I mean, I very much agree with the kind of radical leftist position that um, the division is orchestrated precisely to keep um, folks fighting each other instead of actually, the 1%, if you will. So, I mean, at this point, I mean, that's not a new insight. It's something that, that folks on the left have been saying for a long time, but it nevertheless is true,
Mhm.
right? And, even around, the election, that there's very, there was very little kind of conversation about, uh, from the Democrats about the struggles of working class Americans and those kind of um, economic inequities that have just gotten worse and worse, right? So I think that it's crucial for us to not um, to think about identity politics, but also beyond it.
Mhm. Understanding that you can own your categories, own your labels, own your titles, but at the end of the day, it is the choices that you make, not those factors that determine who you are. It's
Mhm,
so critical in all of this. I think a
mhm.
lot about your journey as well, if we can dive a little
Sure.
more into this, because you talk about how you you yourself, being Jewish, you experiencing anti-Semitism in the United States, you yourself also having family members who are living in what is today called Israel. It-
Mhm.
I'm sure there are so many nuances into all of this, and we can probably just host an entire episode where we could unpack all of that. But for audiences who are tuning in, can you give us a sense of, on one hand, you are a part of this very marginalized identity that has I would argue that this is a very old marginalization. It's definitely
Mhm.
older than the US. I would argue it's older than what we call Europe. The, like
Sure.
so what like and then on top, but then you're also kind of sandwiched into this this dynamic where you have who this group and then you have the history of all
Mhm,
this with Israel, with Palestine, with Lebanon, the Middle East.
mhm,
Like,
mhm.
how do you navigate that? What is it like? How does that even happen? I'm curious.
Well, I'm not exactly quite sure what you're asking. How do I navigate what?
How do you navigate the complexities of
Uh-huh,
this experience?
uh-huh.
Because it's not something that a lot of people definitely think about, and a lot of people may not realize is actually something that someone can go through on a daily basis.
Sure. Well, I mean, there's there's no sort of short answer to that, but I would say that m- personally, it's been um, very important for me to do a lot of unlearning around, what I was taught growing up about, um, you know, the movement for liberation for Palestine. Um, I like a lot of Jewish people, I was taught a narrative, right, that was very kind of pro-Israel, and we need to always kind of stand with Israel, and et cetera, et cetera. And I mentioned my struggles with my family, and just um, for me, um, because I had worked so hard to do a lot of healing around, the the tension about me coming out and being queer, um, that as I kind of got older and began to do quite a lot of questioning about, hey, what is really happening with the rights of the Palestinian people? And what is this history? Um, I'm the first to admit that uh, I was afraid of how, knowing that I could risk sort of alienating my family all over again, right? Because of this, this issue. And for a while, I, I, I didn't publicly speak about Israel and Palestine. Uh, and November 7th of last year changed all of that for me. And I mean, not just that event, but what happened subsequently in terms of the conflict. I did a lot of just really reassessing everything that I had been taught and learned. So to me, it's I'm still on that journey, but it's extremely important to me as a Jewish person to use my voice to stand against human rights violations, regardless of what nation or group commits them, right? I mean, that people deserve human rights because they're human, period, regardless of who they are or where they live. And I feel really strongly about that. And I like to think that hopefully by being a Jewish person and speaking out about how justice for Palestine is not uh, anti-Semitic, that I can help to sort of educate folks around that issue. At the same time, I am somebody who does speak about, and I'm doing a training in just a few weeks for an international audience, and or on anti-Semitism, and uh, I think it's important for folks who are on the left, who are in advocating for justice in Palestine, to also sort of recognize that anti-Semitism is not a fiction. It's not something that is simply just is being weaponized by, the state of Israel, or by right wingers in other countries in Europe and in the U.S. Right? It's something that I experience in my life. I mean, most people have no idea the the hate and the threats that I've been somebody like me has received from white nationalist groups. And in fact, that started when I wasn't doing any work around anti-Semitism at all. I was advocating for racial justice issues, but I was targeted as a Jew by white nationalists, and in very scary ways. So that also led me to begin to see how these issues connect, which I
Abs-
think doesn't people don't talk about that as much as we should.
Mhm. It's so important to because people don't realize that fascism does not care. If you
Mhm,
stand in opposition to it, it does not care about your label, your title, your category. You're just one more obstacle that it needs to get out of the way so it can continue on its mission to divide and to conquer and to pillage and plunder. That's
mhm.
how it works.
Well, and but they care also in terms of, are you a convenient scapegoat?
Mhm,
Are you right? Are you uh, a part of a group that we can demonize as the problem, right? I mean, look how effectively uh, President-elect, I hate to even say that, but President-elect Trump did that in the campaign with immigrants, right? So yeah.
mhm. Absolutely. This hatred of the other, it's all rooted in something that is very old. And I don't even want to give white nationalism all the credit for this because this is an old evil that's been around long before white supremacy even came around. But white supremacy has done a good job at tinkering and coming up with new ways in order to further that agenda, to say the least. The, Elise, I'm curious.
Hmm.
When we talk about these courageous conversations, what do you personally, from your experience, advise that we do in order to even have them? Because like
Hmm.
what are like the practical steps in doing
Hmm.
that? Because it's one thing to say, oh, we need to have a courageous conversation, but what does that actually entail? How do we do that?
Yeah. Well, that it's you're absolutely right that the challenge is in how we execute. And in my opinion, while I, you know, am happy to share certain, steps, and, I mean, even if there are resources you'd like me to share with your audience, I'm glad to do that. But really, I always feel like the most helpful thing is about mindset.
Mhm,
Um, and, sort of going into a courageous, well, first of all, we have to understand what is a courageous conversation. A lot of times when I do workshops or different sessions or trainings, like, people sometimes will talk about, like, a difficult conversation with an employee, having to give bad news, for example, or certain kinds of personnel type issues, having to let somebody go. Um, uh, those are not courageous conversations. Just, so there's sometimes a misunderstanding of, there's a lot of books out there about difficult conversations. And so I think sometimes people um, sort of think that those things are all the same, but every difficult conversation isn't a courageous conversation. Courageous conversations are usually when there are multiple or differing, let me rephrase that, differing viewpoints, um, and uh, and they are about understanding first and foremost, right? So courageous conversations are future looking, right? And that's really important. But again, it's the mindset of of not necessarily a fix it mentality, but fostering true understanding, because the reality is that often when there's conflict, people really want to be understood. They I mean, that it's just a part of kind of who we are as humans. And sometimes, I mean, we've maybe all in our personal life have experienced that, of someone apologizing, but it doesn't really help. It's somehow you don't feel any better. They're saying all the right things, but uh, you're not feeling any better about. And why is that? It's usually because you don't feel um, understood, that there isn't that kind of empathic listening. So um, I know that it would probably be a lot better. People like it when you say, well, here are the 5 steps that you need to take. But I honestly believe that while I do have in my work, I do talk about things that we need to do. Like, it's very important I talk about it as set the table for a courageous conversation, right? We need to prepare. We need to think about the physical space. Is the seating equal? All sorts of things. We need to be educated about psychological safety and be able to recognize what are the warning signs if somebody has a lot of emotion in their voice, or they're raising their voice, or there are other physical signs that they are not feeling safe. We need to know what those are so we can address them. So there are lots of different very concrete components. And the last one, I guess I would say, is that I often feel that people don't think about the after piece of after courageous conversation is often just as important as what happens within the conversation itself, right? Because the work has to be ongoing. And, it's really important for people to emerge out of a courageous conversation with a clear, collaborative. I mean, that's another thing that's very different about like a courageous conversation versus some of those sort of personnel type, workplace personnel conversations that I was mentioning earlier. That courageous conversations are collaborative. And so you want to collaborate on solutions, and make sure that you're both on the same page moving forward. But again, all that aside, I truly, really believe that the most important tool is the mindset of empathic listening.
Empathic listening, and to make sure that we are listening to understand as well as to be understood.
Hmm.
I loved how you mentioned too that we have to approach this from a perspective of really fostering that dialogue, making sure that we are setting the table so that way we can have these courageous conversations, so we can build and grow together as a community to unlearn a lot of the things that we have been taught about each other in these regards. It's so pertinent. And Elisa, we are coming up on time. This has been fabulous. For folks who would be interested in working with Elisa Glick Consulting, and with you in particular, what would be the best way to go about doing that?
Well, I would recommend going to my website, and you can learn more about my services and what I offer. There's a contact form on there, and I'm also very active on LinkedIn, which is how Justin and I connected, right? And so that's another great way to access my content and reach out to me through DMs on LinkedIn is another option. But you know, I'm always happy to explore, regardless of, you know, what sector folks are in, that kind of thing.
I love it. You heard her, folks. Get connected, follow those links, get organized, get involved. We are here on this earth for a reason. We are here to make a change, to be the difference in this world. Be sure to tune in for more insights. Elisa, thank you for coming on. It's a pleasure to have you.
Oh, what a delight to speak with you, Justin. I just so appreciated your care and attention in and just the sort of subtlety and nuance that you try to bring to all of this work, and your obvious real just heart in you know, I love how you lead from a very heart-centered place. So, yeah.
Thank you, Elisa.
Hello everyone, this is Justin Cobb, and that was Elisa Glick. She's fantastic. I'm so grateful that she came on the show today to share more about her work, her journey, her story. It's incredible, and I am so moved by it. I'm gonna leave a link in the comments below to her profile and to her website, so that way you can check those out and collaborate with her, because she's phenomenal. If you like this video, be sure to give it a like, and don't forget to comment and to subscribe. And let us know what you think about Insight and what we are doing. And stay up to date. Also, be sure to check us out on our various other platforms, including our Medium and our Spotify. You'll find exclusive insights there that you won't find anywhere else. Be sure to stay tuned for more insights. We have a lot more coming. Until then, be well.